The day they escorted me out, I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I just walked, silent, while the man who'd stolen credit for my work smirked like he'd finally won. People think rage makes noise, but mine didn't. Mine sat cold in my chest as I realized something he didn't. The system he relied on, the one running half the city's infrastructure, still answered to me. Not him, not the company, me. If you're listening, stay with me. Comment if you've ever seen a boss pull this stunt and subscribe so you don't miss what happened next. I knew something was wrong the second I stepped toward the glass entrance and watched the scanner blink red like it was rejecting me on purpose. I tried again, slower this time, almost whispering to the badge like it could sense desperation, but the light flashed the same unforgiving red. A guard I'd never seen before leaned out of the booth and told me I wasn't authorized to enter. He didn't ask my name. He didn't look confused. He didn't even pretend to verify anything. His tone was flat, rehearsed, like someone had handed him a script with my name printed at the top. I felt my stomach tighten, not from fear but from recognition. This wasn't a glitch. This was intentional. I asked who told him to block me, and he played dumb, pointing me toward administration with the kind of fake politeness people use when they want you gone. I backed away, heat creeping up my neck, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead of leaving, I circled the building, past the loading bay where I'd spent countless nights reviewing plans with contractors who barely remembered to say thank you. The keypad by the side gate still had the old code, the one I'd programmed months ago. I punched it in without thinking, and the lock clicked open, almost like the building itself still remembered me, even if the people inside pretended not to. As I stepped into the half-finished atrium, the smell of concrete and industrial sealant wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. My boots echoed against the exposed floors, and I felt a tug in my chest. This place had swallowed years of my life, years I couldn't get back. Late-night revisions, emergency design fixes, canceled holidays, the endless pressure to prove myself to people who now couldn't be bothered to face me directly. I passed the elevator shafts, the ones I'd redesigned twice because Adrian Mercer insisted on shortcuts that would have failed inspection. I'd saved him, saved the entire project, and he repaid me by locking me out like a trespasser. My workspace sat tucked behind temporary walls, untouched, as if time had paused the moment I stepped out yesterday. Drafts, sketches, annotated blueprints with my handwriting in red still covered the desk. My initials marked the corners of every document like tiny signatures of a life they were trying to erase. I stepped inside and shut the flimsy door behind me, letting the noise fade until it was just my breathing and the faint hum of temporary lights. I sat in my old chair, still uneven, and stared at the corkboard covered in inspection tags and revision stamps that proved I'd built more here than anyone cared to admit. And as I sat there, a thought formed. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet truth settling into place. They wanted me out. They planned it. They executed it. But they were forgetting one thing, something small, something they thought was insignificant. They didn't know what I still controlled. They didn't know what was still legally mine. They didn't know who they had just tried to erase. I stood, took a long breath, and walked back out into the corridor, not defeated but sharpening. I walked straight into the administrative building with a calm I didn't feel, the kind that settles in only when you've already accepted there's no turning back. The meeting room was all glass and fake wood, the kind of space designed to look important but always felt cheap to me. Adrian Mercer stood by the window pretending to review something on his tablet, though I could tell from the stiff way he held it that he'd been rehearsing this moment. A young HR woman sat at the table, posture so straight it looked painful, her laptop open like she was bracing for impact. When I stepped inside, Adrian offered that tight, sympathetic smile people wear when they're about to gut you and want to pretend it's gentle. "Valentina?" he said. "Thanks for making time." I didn't sit. I didn't even pretend I might. It was clear they wanted this over quickly and quietly, like ripping off a Band-Aid. The HR woman launched right in, voice soft but firm, reading from a script she probably practiced all morning. "Effective today, your employment with Apex Urban Systems is being concluded as part of our leadership realignment. This decision is not performance-based, and we appreciate your contributions." The way she said concluded made something inside me go cold. Adrian leaned his hand on the table like he wanted to project fatherly authority. "This isn't personal," he added. "We're restructuring some functions and moving in a more centralized direction. Your role doesn't align with that vision anymore." I stared at him, because for years he had taken credit for the adaptive load balancing system I built, the scheduling model I perfected, even the presentation deck he butchered in front of the board. Not aligned with the vision? I was the reason the project even had a vision. "Interesting," I said, keeping my voice even. "I wasn't in any of the meetings where this new direction was discussed." Adrian didn't blink. Those strategic conversations were at a higher operational level. There it was, the classic corporate insult wrapped in corporate politeness. You weren't important enough to include. You weren't worth informing. You were only worth using until we didn't need you. HR continued, offering the standard separation package, health benefits through the end of the month, and some nonsense about outplacement support. I hardly heard her. My badge, she said gently, had already been deactivated for security purposes. So that was it. That's why the guard looked at me like I was an intruder. They'd locked me out before they even told me I was gone. When she finished, Adrian folded his hands, giving me the earnest mentor look he used on junior engineers when he wanted them to work overtime without complaint. "Look, Valentina, you've done good work here, but sometimes we outgrow certain environments. Take this time to reflect. There are opportunities out there. You just need the space to see them." Reflect, space. As if this was some self-care retreat instead of them cutting me out of a project I'd carried on my back. I kept my face still. "You could have just said you didn't want me in the picture anymore," I said. Adrian's jaw tightened for just a second. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. He knew I knew. He just didn't have the spine to say it aloud. HR stood and gestured toward the hallway. "We'll escort you out now." She meant, "Please don't cause a scene." I didn't. I walked a full step behind her, chin up, making sure everyone in the hallway, every intern, every engineer, every manager who had benefited from my work without ever learning my name, saw my face. I wasn't disappearing. I wasn't dissolving into the whispers of restructuring. When we reached the glass doors, the HR rep murmured a brittle goodbye and stepped away. Sunlight hit me like a spotlight as I crossed the plaza. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. They thought they just erased me, quietly, efficiently, neatly. But they had no idea what they just triggered. They had no idea what I still held. They had no idea that firing me wasn't the end. It was the activation. I didn't pace when I got home. I didn't collapse onto the couch or call anyone to vent. I walked straight down the hallway, past the coat rack, past the shelves of old binders, to the fireproof cabinet I hadn't opened in months. The drawer stuck the way it always did, catching at the top before releasing with that familiar metal scrape. Inside were drafts, receipts, archived plans, and, buried behind everything else, the manila folder with no label, the one I'd created long before Apex ever learned my name. My hands were steady as I pulled it out, steadier than they should have been after the morning I'd had. I carried the folder to the dining table and set it beside the black laptop I kept in a separate lockbox. That laptop wasn't company issued. It wasn't registered in any corporate directory. It wasn't even linked to my personal cloud. I'd built it for one purpose, to house the thing everyone used but no one bothered to understand. When it booted up, the screen didn't show a logo, just a clean white interface that opened directly into my private dashboard. There it was, CrossPredict v1.0, my adaptive predictive infrastructure engine, the same engine Apex had built their entire operational pipeline around. They'd treated it like some internal tool I whipped up as a side project, something they assumed they owned because it ran on their servers. But the truth sat right in front of me. The original registration, the license terms, the LLC paperwork bearing my full name, Valentina Cross. Apex never bought this system. They never negotiated for it. They never even asked what the licensing terms were. They just plugged it in and ran with it because it made their lives easier. And I let them, because at the time I thought loyalty meant shared success. But loyalty without protection is just self-inflicted blindness, and today had ripped the bandage off. I opened the license binder and flipped to the clause I remembered almost word for word. Clause 2B. License remains active only while the developer, V. Cross, maintains active employment with the contracting entity. Immediate termination of employment, voluntary or involuntary, voids all access rights unless renegotiated in writing. They hadn't renegotiated a thing. They hadn't warned me. They hadn't even given me a courtesy email before cutting me off. They violated the contract the moment they fired me. Apex didn't just lose an employee, they severed their legal right to the one system propping up half their projects. I opened a new document, the kind with a header that looks more like a legal notice than a friendly email. I wrote with precision, crafting each line so even the most slippery corporate lawyer couldn't pry it apart. As of this date, due to the involuntary termination of Valentina Cross without renegotiation of the original contractual terms, all usage rights to Cross-Predict v1.0 are hereby revoked. I kept going. System impacts, dependency shutdowns, unauthorized replication warnings. Everything spelled out in language they'd regret ignoring. When the document was complete, I saved it as a PDF and attached it to a message addressed to Adrian, legal CC'd. The subject line was simple: license revocation, immediate effect. Then I opened the admin panel of Cross-Predict, scrolled to the bottom, and found the button I'd buried 3 years ago during development. System lockdown. I clicked it. Not delete, lock, disable, freeze. Apex hadn't just pushed me out, they'd pushed themselves off a cliff, and they had no idea what was coming next. The moment I hit the lockdown command, the screen didn't flare or flash or make some dramatic noise. It simply shifted from active green to a flat, silent gray like a curtain falling in a theater. No fanfare, no fireworks, just the quiet end of their entire operational backbone. I closed the laptop and leaned back, letting the stillness settle around me. For the first time since the security guard told me I wasn't in the system, I felt the faint flicker of something that wasn't anger or humiliation. It was clarity, and clarity hits harder than rage ever could. The first phone call came exactly 31 minutes later. Unknown number. I let it ring. They always think calling immediately erases whatever they did. Then a second call, a third. By the time I made tea, my phone was vibrating so constantly, it almost slid off the counter. I checked the caller IDs, the project director, the integration lead, the junior PM who had once asked me how to spell infrastructure. Adrian hadn't called yet, which meant he was either scrambling or yelling at people, maybe both. I ignored everything and opened my email instead. The inbox was already filling up faster than I could delete messages. From Apex AT admin. Subject: urgent, predictive system failure, deleted. From ops team. Subject: entire load balancing dashboard down, deleted. From project controls. Subject: need access. Presentation in 90 minutes, deleted. Then I saw the one I knew was coming. From A. Mercer. Subject: call me immediately. I opened it only because I wanted to see how he framed his panic. Valentina, something's gone wrong with the predictive engine. We need your assistance to restore functionality. This appears to be a system-wide glitch. Call me now. A glitch. That was the word he chose. Not breach of license, not termination-triggered revocation, not the system you built is responding exactly the way the contract says it should. A glitch, as if calling it, that made it my responsibility to come running back and fix it. I deleted the email and sipped my tea. 20 minutes later, another message appeared, this time far more clipped. This is a critical issue. If this is intentional, we need to discuss legal implications immediately. I almost laughed. Legal implications. They fired me without reading the document that could cripple their entire organization, and now they wanted to talk law. I didn't respond. Instead, I called one person, Martin Hale, the attorney who had helped me register my LLC and draft the original contract years ago. He picked up on the first ring. Valentina, I assume you're calling because they finally stepped on the landmine. They fired me this morning, I said. No notice, no renegotiation, badge deactivated before they even told me. He whistled under his breath. Then the license is void. Full stop. You executed the revocation? And the lockdown. Good, he said without hesitation. They'll make noise, but they don't have a leg to stand on. Don't engage with anything from them directly. If they escalate, I'll handle it. I thanked him and hung up. Another wave of emails hit my inbox as if on cue. This batch had a different tone, shorter, sharper, increasingly frantic. Someone from risk management wrote that multiple smart grid predictions were failing. A city planning liaison begged for clarity on missing update cycles. The operations scheduler typed in all caps. Then a final email from Adrian landed, longer than the others, but somehow more desperate. Valentina, this is getting out of hand. The board is asking questions. If this is something you triggered, we can talk terms. But you need to stop this, right now. This is no longer just about you and Apex. I read it twice, letting each line sink in. There it was, the quiet confession he didn't mean to write. Not about me, not about Apex. What he meant was, this is about him, his job, his reputation, the empire he built on the foundation of something he never owned. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I closed the email, walked to the window, and watched the late afternoon sun slide across the rooftops. Behind those roofs, somewhere inside a glass tower I once believed was my future, a dozen people were probably shouting, rebooting, scrambling, blaming one another, and Adrian was realizing the truth for the first time. Firing me hadn't solved his problem. Firing me had activated it. By the next morning, the fallout had already spread far beyond anything Adrian could patch together with panicked emails and late-night conference calls. I woke to a phone vibrating nonstop on the nightstand, buzzing with messages from numbers I didn't recognize, and a handful I did, the ones who used to walk past me in the hallway without even lifting their eyes from their screens. They weren't calling to check on me. They were calling because their world was burning. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I opened the news alerts that had stacked up while I slept. The headlines weren't subtle. Apex Urban Systems misses major deadlines after sudden predictive engine failure. Internal disruptions raise questions about infrastructure reliability. They didn't mention my name, but they didn't have to. Anyone in the field knew exactly what the predictive engine was and who had built it. The only mystery was why it had gone dark. I made coffee and scrolled through the reports like I was reviewing weather updates. One contractor said their site scheduling collapsed overnight. A civic engineer mentioned that half their planning models froze mid-simulation. The city's transportation sync tool, which depended on my load balancing architecture, was now in manual mode for the first time in 3 years. People weren't panicking for moral reasons. They were panicking because they'd built their entire workflow on a system they assumed belonged to Apex. Assumed. That word had carried them for years. Now it was unraveling them in real time. Around noon, a message came from someone I genuinely didn't expect. Brent Young, a senior partner from the board who'd never spoken to me directly, except to nod during group presentations. His email wasn't emotional. It was strategic, clipped, full of phrases like urgent matter, systemic risk, and operational dependencies. It ended with, "We need to discuss reinstatement and immediate restoration of access." I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another message came through. This one forwarded from the internal board thread by a friend who'd left the company months earlier. Adrian had been fired, effective immediately. The board cited gross mismanagement of critical resources and failure to comply with licensing protocols. I stared at the lines not because the outcome surprised me, but because of how predictable the sequence was. They had blamed him the moment the consequences touched their profits. Corporate loyalty is a one-way mirror. You only see its reflection when you're on the wrong side of it. I set my phone down and opened my laptop, thinking the messages might slow down. They didn't. In fact, they got stranger. Firms I'd competed against were now emailing to ask whether I was accepting consulting work. Agencies from 2 different states wanted to know if I was available for emergency assessments. A tech startup I'd spoken to briefly at a conference months ago asked if I'd consider licensing CrossPredict under my own name. It was like the moment the system went dark, the entire industry remembered who had actually built it. Not Apex, not Adrian, me. I should have felt triumphant or vindicated or maybe even smug. But what I felt instead was a strange, steady calm. Their collapse wasn't my victory. My victory was the silence in my apartment, the freedom in my hands, the absence of any boss hovering over me with demands disguised as compliments. I opened a clean notebook, the one I'd been too busy to use for months, and wrote one line at the top of the first page. What do I want next? Not what Apex wanted, not what Adrian stole, not what a company decided my ceiling should be, what I wanted. Before I could think past that line, my phone buzzed once more, this time with a message from a publication I never thought would know I existed. Request for interview, Infrastructure Innovators Series. And beneath it, a sentence that made me exhale the tiniest laugh. We hear you changed the game. They had no idea. I wasn't done changing it yet. The day I signed the lease on the small loft downtown, the manager barely looked up when I gave my name. That alone felt like freedom. No badge scans, no hushed glances, no contingency plans in case I suddenly became misaligned with leadership goals. Just a chipped key, a month-to-month agreement, and a 12 by 12 room with peeling paint and sunlit windows that didn't need to impress anyone. I stood in the center of the empty space, listening to the quiet hum of traffic outside, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of beginning instead of ending. I placed my laptop on the floor, sat cross-legged beside it, and opened the registration files for Cross Infrastructure Labs, the name I'd scribbled in the corner of a notebook months earlier when the idea felt more like fantasy than possibility. With every line I updated, business address, service tiers, software licensing structure, the weight of Apex slid further off my shoulders. The work wasn't glamorous, it wasn't sleek or dramatic, it was foundational. But foundations are what hold entire structures together, and I was finally building one for myself instead of propping up someone else's. Within hours of launching my bare-bones website, no glossy branding, no polished marketing, just the essentials, messages began populating my inbox. Not from gossip-hungry onlookers or panicked executives trying to salvage their projects, but from people who genuinely needed what I could offer. A transport engineer in Portland, a redevelopment coordinator in Raleigh, a community cooperative in Detroit, asking if I could assist with zoning analytics for an urban garden expansion. They weren't asking for my silence. They weren't asking for shortcuts. They were asking for help because they respected the work, not the hierarchy around it. I brought a folding chair from the storage closet and set it by the window. Daylight stretched across the concrete floor as I drafted proposals, outlined project scopes, and built the future piece by piece. No one interrupted me. No one second-guessed my decisions. No one insisted they knew more because their title was stacked with buzzwords. For once, I wasn't shrinking to fit inside someone else's structure. I was shaping my own. As the days passed, the whiteboard I mounted on the back wall filled with names, timelines, revenue forecasts, and planned software iterations. Nothing looked like Apex's polished chaos. Nothing resembled Adrian's frantic performative leadership. It was slower, steadier, deliberate, and every new client email reminded me that the industry wasn't turning toward me out of pity or outrage. They were turning toward me because competence has gravity. Real gravity, and once people recognize it, they stop pretending not to see it. One evening, long after the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I stepped back from the whiteboard and looked at the growing list of contracts. Not emergency fixes, not patch jobs, real partnerships, real work, mine. In that moment, sitting alone in a secondhand chair in a room most people would overlook, I realized something that made my chest tighten, not with fear, but with pride. I hadn't just walked away from Apex. I had walked into the life they never imagined I could build without them, and I wasn't done building yet. 6 months later, I found myself standing backstage at a national infrastructure summit, holding a microphone I never asked for, staring at rows of chairs filled with people who used to overlook me. When they called my name, the applause rose in a way that felt surreal, like the industry had suddenly remembered I existed. Walked onto the stage, not as an employee trying to prove my worth, but as the founder of Cross Infrastructure Labs, someone they now sought out for answers instead of permission. As I spoke about autonomy, ownership, and the danger of handing your life's work to people who think loyalty is a disposable resource, the room leaned in. They weren't hearing a revenge tale. They were hearing survival, strategy, reclamation. After the talk, messages flooded my phone again, but not the frantic demands I'd once ignored. These were invitations, collaborative projects, long-term licensing conversations, panels, partnerships, and buried between them was the one name I thought I'd never see again. Apex Legal Office, requesting a meeting. "We're prepared to negotiate a long-term license," the email said. "Full compensation at your rate. Terms to your discretion." Not Adrian. He was gone. No apology, no justification. Just the quiet admission that the system they'd tried to take from me had outgrown them. I didn't rush to respond. I let the message sit while I walked back to my loft office, sunlight warming the floorboards, whiteboard covered in new ideas. Everything I needed was already in this room. Everything they thought I'd lose, I had rebuilt without them. I finally typed my reply, simple and direct. "Send the terms. I'll decide if it's worth my time." For the first time in my career, the power wasn't borrowed. It was mine, and I wasn't giving it away again. When I look back at everything that happened, what stays with me isn't the collapse of a company or the headlines that followed. It's the quiet realization that I spent years believing loyalty alone would protect me, that hard work would eventually be recognized, that being indispensable meant being valued. It doesn't. Not in corporate America. What protects you is clarity, knowing what you own, what you've built, and what boundaries you refuse to negotiate. I learned that you can give your best and still be treated like you're disposable, but that doesn't mean you are. It means you need to stop trying to earn respect in places that profit from your silence. People often ask if I feel satisfied with what happened to Adrian and Apex. The truth is, I don't think revenge is supposed to feel like fireworks. Sometimes it's just the simple justice of watching someone finally face the consequences they thought they were too important to suffer. And sometimes forgiveness isn't softness. It's choosing not to carry someone else's failures on your back, but silence when rooted in strength instead of fear can cut deeper than any argument. If there's a lesson I wish I'd learned earlier, it's this. Document everything, protect your ideas, and never sign something you don't understand. Stand up for your value before someone else decides what it's worth. And when a door slams shut, don't waste time pounding on it. Turn around and build your own. Relating it to real life today, job security is fragile, industries shift overnight, and companies protect themselves first. So invest in yourself, your skills, your ownership, your identity outside your employer. If I hadn't done that years ago, I would have walked away with nothing. Instead, I walked away with everything that mattered. How to get started today. Review your contracts and understand your rights. Create a secure archive of your personal work and achievements. Develop one skill that belongs fully to you, not your employer. Write down a goal you've been delaying and take one small step toward it tonight. If any part of my story hit close to home, tell me in the comments. Share this with someone who needs the reminder. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe.